Good morning. My name is Lynn Williams, and I'm a member of the Fine Arts Committee for HASP. One of the first conversations through email that I had with our presenter this morning, she was a little late getting back to me, which I didn't think anything of. And the first line of her email, she said, "I'm sorry I didn't get back to you, but I had tulips on my mind." And I couldn't think of anything nicer to have on your mind than tulips. Emily Van Staldeinen is the garden designer for the city of Hillsdale and Hillsdale, sorry, that's where I used to live. Holland. Yeah. So, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about herself as the presentation goes along. So help me welcome Emily to HASP.
Can you turn your mic back on?
I'll get started again. My name is Emily Van Staldeinen, and I am the City of Holland's Greenhouse Specialist. I started this position in spring of 2018, so I've got a couple years under my belt, and it's an awesome career that brought my husband and I to move and make Holland home in 2019. I grew up in the Chicagoland area, and then I attended Kelvin College, where I double majored in studio art and biology. While I was in college, people often remarked, "What a weird combination, art and biology. How are you going to get those together?" And they would always come up with a limited selection of suggested career paths, pretty much usually only consisting of medical illustration. But considering that in grade school, I once fainted in a doctor's office as he showed me diagrams of what my upcoming tonsil procedure would look like, I figured that probably drawing blood and organs wasn't for me. But I knew that I was passionate about art and biology and had really excelled in both of those areas since childhood. I knew that there had to be some sort of way to put both of those passions and callings together, because why else would God have given me these gifts if there wasn't a way to fit them together in a way that also fit me? So I decided to stick with it, and I double majored in both. And I know that this probably isn't the best place to praise Kelvin College to, as I sit in a building that says Holland or Hope College all over it. But I think the two colleges share the same mission of a liberal arts education. And there aren't many schools that I could have majored into such dramatically different fields and still graduate in 4 years. And I really am thankful that Kelvin afforded me the ability to do that. So I graduated, and not long after graduating, I saw a job posting for the city's greenhouse specialist, and I thought it was too good to be true. I had worked at Kelvin's research greenhouse, attending all of their plants that they use for both science experiments and their plant taxonomy courses. So I had really grown these skills of raising and caring for plants and gotten really passionate about that. I also had a passion for parks and knew how much they both impacted me and my well-being, and how much they can impact the community around us. So I saw this position, and I also saw that it required me to design things. And I was like, oh, this seems like the perfect job for me. So you can't imagine how thrilled I was when at 24, I got what seemed to be my dream job, and still seems to be my dream job today. So I gotta make sure that this is ready to go and click forward. Oh yeah, so yeah, here's about me. So now that I've given you a bit of background about me, here's what I'm hoping to talk with you guys about today. I'll share a bit about the city's greenhouse, the new and the old greenhouse. And then I'll get into some of the behind the scenes looks at how I design and plant the annual beds throughout the city. I'll go through how I select the plants, and then how I make the designs, and how we go through the planting process. And then I'll do the same thing for tulips. So I'll talk about how we select the tulips and how I do the designs and planting. All right, so this is the city's greenhouse. And some of you, I may have visited the greenhouse last summer or last spring when the HASP did a tour. But for those of you that didn't, and just because it's really nice to look at pictures of a nice warm greenhouse on a cold day like this, I've got some pictures and I'll share a bit of information about it. So yeah, the new greenhouse was built behind the Parks Department campus by 16th and Country Club and all of that, and completed construction in 2019. It was built to replace the city's former greenhouse, which is located at 20th and State, right across from Evergreen Commons. And that old greenhouse had served the city for over 100 years, which is really just an impressive long run for an amazing structure like that. But as you can imagine, over 100 years, the city and the parks had expanded, which meant my planting area had also expanded. And in reality, the greenhouse was just not able to accommodate the amount of space that we needed to grow. So the new greenhouse is 10,000 square feet compared to the 5,000 square feet of the former greenhouse. So yeah, here's a picture of the former greenhouse. You can see that we've got some pipes where plants are stored up above other plants in there just to maximize space in the old greenhouse. So yes, beautiful, but crowded. You could also imagine that after 100 years, technology in greenhouse had really changed. Some of the changes that were in the old greenhouse to the new greenhouse allowed us to grow a higher percentage of our annuals from seed. In the former greenhouse, there were so many problems with controlling the temperature, humidity, and also keeping the place clean that a lot of the plants that we grew, when we tried to grow them from seed, they just didn't perform well. So instead, what we would do is we would order plants that were about 4 weeks old, grown at commercial greenhouses and shipped to us as plugs. And we would grow those there to continue them on. The advancements in the new greenhouse have allowed us to grow a greater percentage of stuff from seed. And some of those advancements include a automated ventilation system. This system allows me to set specific temperature parameters that will either turn on 4 gas heaters in the greenhouse to warm the greenhouse in the winter, or in the spring and summer will open and close automatically roof and ceiling vents to cool the greenhouse. This allows the greenhouse to stay within the temperature parameters I set all by itself. This is a big improvement over the former greenhouse's hand crank ventilation system, which required me to open the greenhouse manually every morning, and then also come in the evening and close it up every night. So yes, it's a lot better for young tender plants and a lot better for my work-life balance because I don't have to come in every single night anymore. The new greenhouse also features complete cement floors and corrugated plastic walls, which allow us to keep the greenhouse really clean and sanitary. All of this has allowed us to grow, up to 40% of our annuals now from seed versus only 5% in the former greenhouse in 2018. This results in a pretty major cost savings for the city, which has allowed me to invest some of that money back into making more unique plant selections and different stuff for the greenhouse. I just really am so thankful that City Council and all of the taxpayers and citizens of Holland agreed that this was something that they wanted to prioritize. And thankful for such a rich history of floriculture in Holland, that there were visionaries that not only decided 100 years ago to make a whole festival based on flowers, but to continue that festival with flowers throughout the entire year. All right, so now that I talked a bit about the greenhouse structure, it's time to get the exciting stuff, what goes inside of the greenhouse. Each year, my crew and I raise about 100,000 annuals in the greenhouse. These will go in a wide variety of planting locations throughout the city, 20 different planting locations. There are parks, downtown, corridors, and different city-owned properties like the Civic Center. So these 20 different locations are made up of like 350 different unique flower beds, which is a big area to oversee. And as I said earlier, those plants are either grown from seed or plug. You can see that these are all begonia and coleus seedling plugs that we had shipped in last year. I was sitting on the table, thought it was pretty cool looking with a quilt of different colors. Such a big undertaking means a lot of prep work on my part. And that prep work begins as early as the summer of the previous year when I begin to notice plants that are performing well and not performing well. And also I go to visit some different public gardens and trial gardens to make decisions about, okay, well, I'm really liking how this plant is looking in the landscape, and I'm not thinking that this one's doing as well. After that, in December, once my crew and I have finished tulip planting, I begin nailing down exactly which plants I want to order. I do this by making what I call the annual design book, which I have a little mock-up of that right here. And in that, I'll go through each of our major planting locations, which usually is pretty much Centennial Park, Window on the Water Farm Park, and downtown. These major planting locations both have like the most plants that we plant and also have the highest impact and visibility in the community. For each of these places, I'll come up with a color scheme that I'm wanting for the next year, and then I'll also consider the aesthetic feel and vibe that I'm going for. I want that vibe and feel to kind of match the character and history of that location. Let me explain what I mean with that. Centennial Park is a historically Victorian themed park, and Victorian gardens featured a lot of carpeting beds of colors with borders, neat symmetry. And then also Victorians had a kind of an obsession with tropical plants, as there was the whole colonialism all around the world and bring different tropical plants in. So for Centennial Park, I try to continue to keep with that Victorian theme by choosing plants like elephant ears and canna that fit the tropical theme, and then shade-loving begonias, coleus, and impatiens that will form carpeting beds and borders that really fit with the Victorian theme. In contrast, we have Window on the Waterfront Park, which has wide open spaces with restored prairie areas. And there I feel like I need to go with a more naturalistic theme, something that feels wildflower-esque and really just kind of evokes prairies. So for this location, I usually rely heavily on things like rudbeckia and salvia, things that are pollinator friendly. I really just kind of feel more like a prairie feel. But on top of thinking about the feel of the location, I also have to think about the growing conditions. So sun versus shade is really important. In Centennial Park, there's a lot of shade, which kind of limits the amount of plants I'm allowed to choose. Most annuals prefer 6 to 8 hours of full direct sunlight to thrive well. So there I really have to limit myself to things like begonias and coleus and impatiens that perform pretty well in shade. In downtown, on the north side of the street, most of the beds are full sun all day, but on the south side of the street, they're shaded by buildings. So things are different there. And then Window on the Waterfront, all of the beds are in full sun pretty much the whole day, but the irrigation at that park consists of large rotator sprinklers, which blast the entire area from a distance. And so there I have to choose plants that maybe are less delicate than I can choose downtown. And it's also pretty smart to choose something that's a bit more drought tolerant. So you can see that all of those things require both an artistic mind to think about what plants and colors I want, but also a scientific mind to keep track of, okay, what growing conditions are we choosing for each of these areas, and what do the plants need to survive? So after I've kind of thought about that, I'll make the annual design book, and here's an example of the one I made last summer for Window on the Waterfront. As you can see, I chose a lot of yellows and purples for that last year. And part of that was because rudbeckia, which is one of the really wildflower looking black-eyed Susan plants, is yellow. And then some of my other top favorites for Window on the Waterfront, gomphrena and salvia, are blue and purple. But such a big area that 3 plants isn't quite enough. So then I begin going through and thinking about other plants that will pair well with those colors that also fit that scheme. So here I'll add in petunias and zinnias and some grasses, all things that will fill out and really evoke that color scheme. Purple and yellow is also a really good combo for a large space because they're across from each other on the color wheel. So when you look at the plants from a distance, they're not blending in together as much as they would if you had 2 really close colors on the color wheel. You can see the contrast from a distance, which is really, I think, really important in such a large area. So I make all of that. And then each year I also try to choose a few different new varieties of plants that I've never grown before. This is good for me as an artistic person because I always like to have something new to work with and try and get excited about. But it's also a lot of fun as a scientific mind because it gives me something to observe throughout the summer and also to hone in my growing skills. So each year we'll plant at each location a few different varieties I've never grown before. And then throughout the summer, my crew and I will monitor how they perform. Last year we tried Cosmos, which I didn't have the best luck with. And I think that's because I had them a little bit sown too early in the greenhouse. We started them pretty early on. And by the time we planted them in the landscape, they were quite root bound, which meant that they couldn't really establish roots into the landscape and kind of just flopped over and didn't perform very well. So I'm not saying I'm not going to try those again. I think I just need to keep learning as a grower and continue to hone in my skills. But it's really important, I think, for me, especially because I'm still pretty early in my career, to continue to try new things. All right, and here's some pictures of that annual design book in action. This is from a window on the waterfront last summer. You can see the salvia and the rudbeckia and the gomphrena all filling in there. You can see the color in the background and the foreground. Yeah, and here's a panorama of the whole landscape. So yeah, this was after we had spent like a week weeding this whole area. So it was important to take photos then. All right, so now I've thought about all of the plants that I want to select to order for the next year, but I haven't really at this point gone through and actually designed each individual bed. This is because I have a deadline for when I can place these annual orders. Usually about mid-January, I want to get everything set and ordered and have if it's plugs, have the growers begin growing it so that they can ship it to us. Or if it's seed, I want to have those shipped to us so that we can start growing it in-house. So then in about this time of year, around February, I start drawing all of the designs for all of the beds. As I'm drawing the designs, I have to consider things like the size of the flower bed. So if it's a larger flower bed, I'll want more of a variety of plants and also to have elements that are height and elements that are lower. So I'll choose something structural for a large bed, like a grass or a canna. And then I'll also choose some lower bedding plants that form a perimeter. Usually the structural elements, I'll try to go with an odd number because that's a little bit more visually balanced. And I'll place those evenly throughout the bed. And then I'll fill in the spaces with 2 or 3 other shorter plants that either contrast in color or sometimes they all go together. It really depends on what feel I'm going for that year. I also consider things about how the bed is going to be viewed. Is this bed going to be viewed slowly as you're walking through a park and looking closely at the plants? Or is a bed mostly going to be viewed by people driving by at 40 miles an hour? If you are driving by at 40 miles an hour, it doesn't really make sense to have as much variation in plants and unique selections. More impact is going to be made by a single plant color that's just making up the entire bed. Then you can see it as you're going by. But if it was just a single plant in a bed where people are walking around, say like at Centennial Fountain, that would be pretty boring. So I try to choose different themes and different varieties of plants depending on how people are going to view the bed. All right, so after I've done that, I start thinking about how actually placing the plants in the bed. So usually I'll begin that by placing the structural plants. So I don't know how well you can see in this, but the A is the colocasia, which is a really large elephant ear. I place those first, and then I fill in the rest of the place or the space with the filler plants, kind of noting how much those plants will grow to fill the space. Most of the plants we grow into a 3-inch container, but that doesn't mean they're going to stay 3 inches wide in the landscape. Some of our plants will grow up to 2 feet wide once they're in the landscape. So I'll note that as I'm drawing out the design, and I'll place them all together. And so here is that bed in the summer. So you can see we've got the canna and the elephant ear forming the back, and then you've got the different heights going forward. However, my drawings don't always look as good as that. As I said, I have 350 beds to design, which is quite a bit. So over the course of the summer, you can see a progression of my drawings. This is Colin Park's bed. You can see in B, I just have fill in. And then it gets even more like a window on the waterfront, which is one of our last areas to plant. I'm just drawing large sections of what plants are going to go there. And then it even gets to the point where I'll just walk ahead of my crew with a thing of marking paint and just draw a line and say, plant this here and plant this here. It works pretty well for my crew. I've been really blessed to have really amazing crew members every single year that I've worked here who, you know, over the course of the summer begin to figure out, okay, we need the begonias to have this much space around them, but the impatiens only need this much space. They really, you know, every year I've had great luck with them really being able to understand my communication and be patient with me, and we figure it all out. And so we plan a bed like this that will end up looking like this later in the summer. And it's been really a blessing to have such an amazing crew of usually like college age girls to work with every day. All right, so that's pretty much the extent of our annual planting. Now I'm going to move on to tulips. The Parks Department plants 400,000 tulips in the parks system every year. These go in the parks, downtown, and also along the tulip lanes. This isn't counting what's planted at Windmill Island, which their staff does about another 100,000 there. So altogether, the city plants a lot of tulips. Such a big undertaking also requires a lot of prep work. And so for me, that begins the previous season when I go around and make a lot of observations on what tulips are growing. I'll go through each park and I'll make observations about what color the tulips look like. I'll take photos. A lot of tulips will change color as they're progressing. So they'll start off with one shade and then they kind of change into a different shade throughout their bloom cycle. I'll also note things like height, like how tall each tulip is getting, and I'll note what time they're blooming. So we have our tulip time is that first week in May, but tulips start blooming pretty much around mid-April. So they'll start a little bit earlier. So I try to choose and look at what bloom time each tulip has so that I know that for the future. I'll note my personal favorites, things that I think really looked nice. And I'll also note things that are really crowd pleasers. So I'll kind of people watch it in all of the parks and be like, oh, lots of people are standing by this bed of flowers and observing that. Or I'll look at Instagram, which is really great because I can see, oh, people took a ton of pictures of that sensual touch tulip. I didn't really like it, but I guess people do. So yeah, there's some tools that I use to really kind of figure out, okay, what's really getting people excited about tulips. All of these observations about the bloom time and height will be made even easier for me this year because we've planted a new observation field on the Parks Department property. Here I've planted about 50 of each tulip bulb, all in alphabetical order in rows, so that every single morning I can go out and make observations. Okay, tulip Angel's Wish is blooming today. It's this color and it's going to get this tall. And that can even take some cuttings of those tulips and be like, okay, Angel's Wish is pairing really well with this one, and I can put them together. And I'm really, really excited about this new space. I think it'll really push my tulip designs to the next level. And I think it's exciting for me as a scientific person because I have some data to record every single day and just make observations and take notes on that. So yeah, that's pretty exciting development for me for next year. That information is really important to make decisions about what I want to order. If some tulips flop, don't look good on the landscape, or bloomed way too early, I need to be able to know that so I know not to order that one next year. If some tulips are really amazing, then I'm like, okay, well, keep that one on the order. Because of this, I always try to order a few new varieties every single year so that we can both keep things exciting and new for people coming to visit tulips every year. And also just to keep a continual flow of new information and new data in case I find that, like, okay, we're having really bad luck with this tulip and we need to replace it with something new. So after I've thought about all of the tulips I want to order, I go through and I use historical use records. So about how many tulips we ordered total, how many of each type, which I'll get into the types of tulips. And I use all of that information to set quantities, and then I will place those orders in June. Each year, we order about 150 or 120 different varieties of tulips. And yeah, as I said, all of those are broken up in different types. So one of the first types is single lates. Single lates bloom probably the latest of all of our tulips that we grow. They're a tulip that is just a classic tulip. It's got the large 3 to 5 inch head up on a pretty tall stem, about 18 to 26 inches. And yeah, they bloom nice and late, and they're really classic tulip. Another classic is a triumph tulip, which is pretty similar in look to the single lates, but they bloom a bit earlier. Then we also grow lily tulips. Lily tulips have a very distinct, almost ballerina shoe type shape with the pointy edges, kind of more classic historical tulips if you think about what's growing like natively more in Istanbul and Turkey, where the tulips originate. Then we have parrot tulips, which are ruffly, and they don't get as tall, but they're usually showstoppers. They're really amazing looking tulips, pretty early, and some of my favorites are the apricot tulips and stuff. There's fringe tulips, which will have the ruffled edge. Those bloom a little bit earlier than the single lates and triumphs. And then my personal favorite are Darwin hybrids, which are a cross between a very large, showy emperor tulip and the single late tulip. These tulips have giant 3 to 5, usually even 5 to even bigger size, like flower heads up on really tall stems. They're really beautiful. If I had my way and tulip time was a month earlier, I would order way more Darwin hybrids. They are really great for placing in different places that have a lot of shade. In like Centennial Park, I really like to put them behind the bench beds because they get so tall that when someone's sitting on the bench, it's almost like they're sitting right among the flowers, which makes some really great photo ops for people. So yeah, I really like Darwin hybrids. And then new this year for me are double late tulips. Windmill Island's grown some of these in the past, but you can see that they're kind of ruffly they're also sometimes called peony tulips. They've got double the petals. My old boss who retired last March did not like double tulips, but now he's gone. So I can choose some of these different varieties. So yeah, I've got about 10 different varieties that will be planted around the parks this year that are double lates. All right, so once all the bulb orders have been placed in June, different farmers in the Netherlands grow them for us throughout the summer, and then they all get harvested and shipped to us, and they arrive around September, which is when planting finally begins. Tulip planting and designing is a little bit more straightforward than annuals, but there's still a lot to think about. So I don't have to worry as much about the sun versus shade because a lot of the tulips have all of the energy that they'll need to produce the beautiful bloom already in the bulb. But there are other things to think about, like the microclimate of Holland and downtown's heat. So downtown, because of the snowmelt system and the heat from the buildings, tulips downtown bloom on average about a month earlier than tulips in other locations. This means that I got to choose late blooming varieties so that we can have them lasting all the way up to through the parades. You can see that this is a bed downtown. This was taken before tulip time, and you can already see these tulips are on their way out. So it's important to be factoring in that bloom time, especially for choosing what plants to go downtown. In the inverse, places like Window on the Waterfront, where there's a lot of wind, or places like Centennial Park, where there's a lot of shade, which I know I said shade doesn't matter for the blooming of the tulips, but it does remember a little bit for the time. If it's in a really shady location, that area will stay cooler and those tulips will hold off a bit longer. That's an area where I can plant something that's a little bit earlier blooming so that we all get things to be as close to tulip time as possible. May 8 is kind of like the end of when tulips could be blooming in some years. So it's a little bit of a challenge to make sure that we're getting tulips to hold on all the way to that point. I'll also consider color. Shockingly, not all tulips look good next to each other. And I've learned that the hard way over the past few years of doing this. A couple years, I've planted some things that were just flops that I'm like, I will never plant those together again. I know I probably noticed that a lot more than other people do because I'm a critic and I'm noticing things like tulips every day. But one year I planted two purples right next to each other, and the one purple sort of had a magenta-y undertone and the other one had a plummy undertone, and they just clashed. Another year, actually last year, I planted this really tall, beautiful Van Eyck tulip, which I think I had a picture of. Yeah, Van Eyck. And then I planted underneath it Lily Ballerina tulip, which is a tulip that's like an orangey sunset with a hot pink sort of interior. And I thought that they were going to look awesome together, but then Ballerina did not come up as Ballerina. Ballerina came up just red, and it did not look very nice next to the hot pink. Those were not two colors that looked well together. But sometimes I have successes, and this is one of the ones I would say is a success. This is Tulip Angel's Wish and Tulip World Friendship next to each other. This is pretty early on for Angel's Wish, and you can see that it's got the kind of pale yellow throat, which I thought just paired really, really nicely with the pale yellow in World Friendship. I also like to consider things like height, similarly to how I do the annual beds, where I want the taller stuff towards the interior and the shorter stuff towards the exterior. So you can see it from a distance. I'll do the same thing with tulips. I try to make sure that if I'm doing multiple tulips next to each other, I want the taller tulip to be more towards the interior and the shorter tulip to be towards the outside. So you can see here, and this is Hocus Pocus, and probably, I think also Angel's Wish together. So the two different heights, you can see them both from a distance and from ground level. Tulips are pretty tricky because after I plant them, I don't know how they're going to look for 6 months. All bulbs go in the ground looking pretty much the same. Some tulip farmers say that they can tell the difference between bulbs just by looking at them, but I don't believe it. So yeah, it's 6 months to wait and hope that the designs that I put together end up going through the way I wanted them to. So this really shows the importance of keeping really good record keeping and data. This is not something that I think if I hadn't had my background in biology and the importance of taking diligent scientific methods and making sure I knew how to record data, I think I would have really struggled in this area. But yeah, sometimes I have successes. So this is Mrs. Sheeper's tulip is the yellow. Belize tulip is the hot pink, and then you can see Queen of the Night in the background there. Those were three that I just really was happy with how that color swatch turned out. All right, so now I've thought about all of the colors and everything, and it's time to get drawing. So usually I do this in August and September, a little bit before the tulips get in. How I go about the drawing and placing the tulips depends a bit on the location. So this is Window on the Waterfront, the big field area. And every year I will take a map of the field area and I'll draw different aesthetically pleasing shapes into the map. I try to change it up every year because, that's fun. So I'll make the aesthetically pleasing shapes, and then I'll take pairings of tulips. I'm like, okay, this tulip looks good next to this tulip. We'll put those two together, and I puzzle piece it all together. Not only trying to think about what looks good right next to each other, but what looks good across your line of vision. So as you're looking into the park in one direction, I want the colors to kind of repeat again and again. So you can see this here. This is like one direction looking at window. You can see the repeating yellows and pinks and oranges again and again, which I think really turned out well, even though this year, this was 2019, I had every single tulip that we ordered planted at Window on the Waterfront. So it just really depends on the direction you're looking and seeing what colors are popping out at you. So I'll make all of those shapes and I do all those designs. And then my crew and I will take the map and we'll go through and mark each location, kind of trying to follow what I've drawn on the map and make the corresponding shapes. We'll mark these out and then I'll flag which tulip belongs in that bed. And on Community Planting Day, which usually takes place the second weekend in October, it's really simple for us to just go find the flag, drop what tulip belongs there, and then just tell people to plant in their specific area. This is how we plant 100,000 tulips at Window on the Waterfront every single year. This is with a lot of volunteer work. So a lot of prep work on my part for getting all of that ready. And we've had success every single year. I'm really impressed with our community that we have about 100 volunteers come out every single year to plant all of the tulips at Window on the Waterfront. But not every bed is as straightforward as just, okay, this tulip is going to be here in this section. Some areas I kind of get a little bit more complex with my design. And this is going to be Centennial Park's tulip design for on the fountain for this coming spring. As you can see, it's pretty complex. It ended up, my crew and I had to make some cardboard stencils to draw out the shapes. So I got like a windmill motif and a tulip motif going through the whole park. So, or going through the whole bed. So it's pretty complex and this is probably my most ambitious design yet. I'm really excited to see how it turns out this spring. So yeah, that took us about a week to plant just this one bed, which is actually, it's close to 20,000 tulips in just that bed around the fountain. So, you know, a week actually doesn't seem too bad. I also have to design downtown, which is more straightforward than Centennial Park's fountain bed because those beds downtown, they're smaller. So they're usually only about 500 tulips per bed. And there we usually only can put one color in because if you put in too many colors, it just doesn't show up as well. So there it's a little bit more straightforward. I'm just putting a single individual, always single late tulip because they need it to be nice and late, tulip in each of those beds. But I do try to think about the signage and the colors of the buildings that are around each bed. So you can see here is Peach Wave. You can kind of see their logo in the background of this photo, which is an orange with the green. And then I tried to echo it with an orange and green, maybe green because all tulips are green, but orange tulip in the front. So yeah, for downtown, the design is pretty much just listing each bed. And then you can see I got them all numbered. And then I'll write which tulip belongs in that bed and about how many we'll need to plant for each of those beds. This makes it really easy and straightforward that last year we were able to have the whole parks department, so office staff, everyone, come out and do a downtown planting day. So we got the entire downtown 8th Street planted in just a single morning, which was amazing because normally that takes my crew of about 4 people and I like a week and a half to plant everything. So yeah, shows again, importance of prep work and thinking ahead to make sure that everything planting season goes really nice and smoothly. So that's about all I have about the tulip planting and annual planting. I want to thank you guys for showing some interest in how I go about my work every single year, and hope I could share a bit about, you know, the beauty and the designs of all our beautiful parks and how amazing it is that we have a community that is so invested in flowers, not just in the parks department, but all of the neighborhoods. I mean, like I said, I grew up in the Chicago area and there are gardens there, but it's almost like Holland is like, wow, every single person seems to have a garden. So yeah, I'm really just thrilled to have found a community that is so invested in flowers and so invested in design and plants more flowers per capita than any other, I think any other city in the country. So it's pretty amazing. So yeah, thanks for letting me share with you guys.
If anyone has any questions.
Thanks. That was very interesting. And I didn't realize how complicated it was to design these things. Windows on the Waterfront has just been looking spectacular, I think, the last 2-3 years.
Thank you.
Could you talk a little bit about planting the lanes, the tulip lanes?
Yeah, so my crew doesn't really oversee that as much, but I do know a lot about the process. So the tulip lanes will begin getting dug out in different sections starting in September. So they'll have a trenching machine that comes along and they'll dig in about a 1 foot and 1 foot wide and 1 foot deep area along all the tulip lanes. And then in September, October, November, a crew will come through and they'll place all of the tulips in rows in the trench. And then they'll come with another truck that dumps soil on top of all of those. Last year, they actually had Holland Christian's band came and helped with planting. They planted all of 12th and Washington Boulevards in one day. The American Legion band director is also Holland Christian's band director, and he just really wanted to get his students outside and kind of engaging with the community. So yeah, they were able to volunteer and plant all of those lanes in one day. Just really amazing. The Parks Department has been, struggling with staffing as everywhere else has. And I think I used to be really, really stressed about that. But now we've really been noticing that people in the community really just want to volunteer and be engaged in this. And it's a resource that we're going to exploit because it's really amazing to have so many people in the community be so interested in planting and helping out with that. So yeah, does that pretty much answer?
You don't replace all the tulips in the lanes.
No, so the tulips go through a cycle. Certain areas do get replaced every year. So like 12th and Washington Boulevard, especially because we plant those areas with annuals afterwards, and they really just need to look awesome every single year. Those areas will get planted every year, but the other tulip lanes are on a 2 or 3 year cycle. We'll go through in the spring and we'll be like, okay, this section of lanes, the blooming isn't that great, so that area really needs to be replaced next year. Or if we find that like, okay, this section here has been the same for 2 years, but it still looks awesome, we're gonna let it go another year. So that takes a lot of observation and monitoring during tulip time to see how areas are blooming and how they're doing. Yep. Sue?
I have a couple comments and questions in the chat, and I'll take turns with the people in the classroom. But the first comment was excellent presentation. Love your design book. The next is a question. How many vendors do you use to purchase all the flowers?
Okay, so our main vendor for annuals is Ball Seed, which kind of owns a sort of a monopoly on the plug and seed market. So they will develop different plant genetics and then send those seeds to different growers. So we will order our stuff through Ball, but we'll have it come from about 6 different growers who have contracted through Ball to grow their product. So it's a little bit tricky, especially because each year I need to find a competitive bid for all of our annuals. So I have to look for other competitors, which sometimes is really, really difficult because this company kind of has a corner on the market. They own Proven Winners, they own Burpee, they kind of have the corner on the market. So they're the main vendor, but then we can find different vendors underneath them that grow things competitively. And then tulips, they all come from one broker who contracts with different farms in the Netherlands. So all of our tulips, I mean, we grow 120 different varieties. There's no single farm that can grow that many varieties, but all of the farms kind of have it's very regulated in the Netherlands, what farm can grow which bulb. And they will all communicate and coordinate and make sure that through our supplier, who usually is Unex, that we get all of the bulbs that we ordered as we ordered them.
Anyone else in the classroom have a question?
I know where the greenhouse is near Evergreen Commons, but I have no idea where the new city greenhouse is.
Yeah, so the new one is back behind the Parks Department buildings. So between Pilgrim Home Cemetery at 16th Street and then 24th Street, where the Parks Department main offices are, halfway in between those two areas is where the greenhouse is. So that's the whole Parks Department campus. It's really nice that I'm actually on the same campus now as the rest of our department staff. I used to be, when we were at the old greenhouse, I would go weeks without seeing anyone else from the Parks Department, just because we were in a different location. So now it's really nice that we're all together at the same place. So yeah, if you think about Holland Middle School's track, I look over that every single day. So that's where it's located.
Okay, I have another question from the chat where I guess we're going to take turns. How do you deal with pests? For example, rabbits.
Oh, rabbits and squirrels, squirrels, especially for tulips. It's something I've had to kind of, learn to get over. I want all of the gardens that I both grow myself at my own house. I have a very large vegetable garden, as you can imagine. I like to garden a lot. I want them to be part of the ecosystem that we're in. And so that means that I'm going to have to deal with a bit of pest and disease pressure. So, we plant a lot of tulips and we're just like, all right, some percentage of these are going to be taken by squirrels, and there's really not much we can do about that. And sometimes they'll mess up my designs by they'll dig up a tulip here and they'll plant it in a bed over here, and then there'll be one random color coming up somewhere else. And I just kind of have to learn that I gotta just roll with that. For deer at Window on the Waterfront and a couple of our other parks, we put up deer fencing every year because otherwise they will just eat the entire area clean. Last year, I made this really beautiful design in front of the Train Depot welcome sign was shaped like a heart. And I saw that it was coming up really great in the spring. And then some deer had got in it and ate every single bulb down, and there were no tulips that were coming up at one point. So that was really upsetting. So yeah, for deer, we'll put up deer fencing. Rabbits will eat the hostas and stuff, and it's just kind of just deal with it. If it's really bad, we will use some liquid fence, which is a thing that smells really bad to rabbits and they don't want to eat the plants anymore. And in the greenhouse, I have a lot of problems with pests and disease like aphids and stuff like that. I'm really trying to keep it organic in the greenhouse because I think it's good for my staff and I, as well as the environment. So this year I've been taking classes on using beneficial controls, so like beneficial nematodes and mites that are predators that will attack the insects and pests that I get in the greenhouse. So that's a new area of research that I'm taking classes to learn more about, to use biological controls to control the pests that we get in the greenhouse rather than chemical controls.
How to unshare your screen, because I think I'd like for you to see your class at home as well. If that's your last slide.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it is. So
How do I do that?
yep,
Quick
click on
Zoom?
that. Oh no,
Oh,
I didn't mean to disrupt it that much. I'll go ahead and do it. We're trying some new things with Zoom, and I think you being able to kind of see all the people at home. We have 27 people. No, we do not want to leave this meeting. Okay, now I've disrupted this. Give me a second. You can go ahead though and ask another question. Yeah.
yeah.
Hi, the living book that's in Centennial Park,
Mhm.
I would imagine is stored in the greenhouse.
Yeah.
But my question is, does that survive until you bring it back out, or does that have to be all replanted?
Yeah, so the plants in the Oz Living Book, my staff and I do care for that. They are different sorts of like succulents and so Pilea, alternanthera, sedum are the main plants that go in the Oz book. Those plants do perennialize, so they can live for multiple years, but they can't in our climate. They are not zone hardy enough. So we live in a zone 5B, which is the USDA's ruling for okay, this is how cold things get in the winter and the frost point. So those plants don't survive in our landscape for the winter here when it freezes. So usually the past couple of years, we've replanted the entire Osbook every single year. So we'll bring it into the greenhouse, disassemble all of the plants, take them out, and then replant new ones. This year we tried, and we're still trying because it's still ongoing, just keeping those plants living in the Osbook through the winter to see how it goes in the greenhouse, if we can keep those for a secondary year. So yeah, we've kept the greenhouse pretty warm. I did kind of let it go through a little bit of a dormant phase to slow down the growth of those annuals. And now it's warming back up again and we're giving it more fertilizer. So we're going to see if we can get those plants to grow for 2 years. Those plants, the Osbook is quite a bit of work. I have to trim it every other week to keep those plants in a nice consistent shape so that you can continue to see the design. Otherwise they would grow and fill in and you wouldn't see the design very well. So yeah, is that pretty much cool? All right, good to see all of you.
Yeah, there
All of
you
you
go.
at home.
And we have, somebody has asked a couple questions in the same chat. So I'll just kind of shoot them out. And if you need me to repeat them. Did you lose space at Window on the waterfront now that the nature playground has moved there? Are there digital programs that you use for bed designs? And I'll just start there. And then there's one more.
Okay, so with the new playscape at Window, which I'm really excited about because I'm actually found out that I'm pregnant recently and going to have a baby coming soon. So I'm really excited to have a playground at Window for playing with my future family. I did lose a few beds with that new playscape, but that area was mostly kind of underdeveloped and just a field in the first place. So I think I lost 3 beds there. But the area at Window south in the field area has really been expanding quite a bit over the past couple of years. So honestly, I'm fine with losing a couple beds. We've, the first year I was here, we planted about 75,000 annuals and now we're at 100,000 annuals. So I'm ready to cut back. We've got quite a bit of area. So yeah, we lost a couple beds there, but not too much. For digital programs, most of what I do, I just do by hand, and I'm just drawing everything out. That is starting to change though, because I'm working with the city's GIS, which is the Geographical Information System, with their department to have every single bed in the city mapped out and then have information stored in all of those programs, which how many tulips we plant in each bed, what we planted there this year, what we planted there another year, to have all of that information stored in one database, which will be good for me because keeping track of a lot of different pieces of paper, both for the annual designs and for the tulip designs is a little bit tricky. So having one space where everything's stored is really kind of important. And so, yeah, we're moving forward with technology. It's been kind of low tech for a while, but gonna see if we can do some of this new stuff with GIS.
I've been given permission to go forward. We have probably 2 or 3 more in the chat. Any discussion about planting some rain gardens along 8th Street or at a Collin Park to divert road parking lot runoff into Lake Mac?
Yeah, so rain gardens, there is, I think Macatawa Area Coordinating Council, so MAAC, has been doing some rain garden projects. So like when they redid 19th Street, they installed a bunch of rain gardens along there. That wasn't some of the parks was super involved with. We did a little bit of coordinating with them, but they have been doing some rain gardens along there. And then City Hall's parking lot is going to get redeveloped this next summer. And in the medians, they're going to be putting rain gardens in there. So we are trying to go forward with rain gardens. I know a lot about the importance of rain gardens. I worked for Plaster Creek Stewards when I was at Calvin. So yeah, I think, downtown, we like to have the tulips. People like to see all those colors and stuff. So I don't know how much rain garden will move forward with downtown, but I think, especially with the future of waterfront Holland and thinking about down the road with big projects like that, I'm going to definitely advocate for, and I know we have in the city's staff a new environmental environmental coordinator, I think is his position title, Dan Boersma. I know he's going to advocate for making sure that we find good ways to divert the water and continue to preserve the resources we have at the city.
HASP has provided a couple of rain garden classes in the past.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was last summer or in the fall, but I'm sure that that will probably come up again because we've had a lot of people interested in that.
Yes, it's really, really important. I think, no one really thought about when we were building all these cities, like, oh, there's water here, let's just put it underground. I mean, even the old greenhouse is above a underground forced river, which means that the basement often floods because sometimes the water will bust up. So I think, there's a lot of opportunities that planting and gardens will have for, the future of preserving the environment. And I think it's really important to make sure that we're thinking about all of those things and studying that. So yeah, that's what I got about you.
Anyone else in the classroom? Oh, I'm sorry. I was right here.
Windmill Island has their own system for planting and growing and is that
Yeah.
separate from the city.
So Windmill Island is sort of within the city, but sort of out of the city because they do charge admission. So it's like not fully within the city, but it's also partly joint with the city. A little bit bureaucratic. But they have, they're in the park system, but they have their own staff that does the designing and everything there. I coordinate with them a lot. And, we go through and we compare notes like, oh, we grew this thing and it did really well, or I'm going to try this thing next year. They know about my new observation field for tulips. And so I think they'll be using that resource a lot too, to continue to make notes for their gardens. But 350 beds is a lot for me to manage right now. So I'm kind of glad that there's another crew that I can coordinate with that oversees Windmill Island.
There you go.
Where do you go to volunteer? What is the process?
So yeah, for volunteering, for Community Planting Day, that's through Tulip Time. So Tulip Time as an organization will set up all of the volunteer programs and has the volunteer sign up. Usually they start posting about that in early September. Other planting, we had, just like my crew and I organized with a 14th Street Church and Pillar Church last year to do some planting at Centennial Park. So I'm always open for groups coming in and saying, hey, we really want to volunteer. Can we make something happen? And then do some prep work and planning for that. So yeah, if you ever have a group of like, oh, we need some people to want to do some volunteer work, shoot me an email.
Susan, do you have?
Yeah, I think you may have already answered this, and I think I missed one, but I'll combine these two questions. What is done with used bulbs each year? Did I already ask that? And
No.
then can you tell us about the replacement of bulbs every year? And are there any that can bloom multiple times? And you may have addressed that.
I don't think I really have. So tulips are technically perennials, but we don't always get good blooming at the second year of a tulip. So tulips have a really interesting life cycle. All tulips originally start as a seed from cross-pollination. So you'll breed one type of tulip with another type of tulip. And those, after 7 years, will start to form a bulb, which will have a flower. So tulip breeders will wait 7 years between when they cross-pollinate two flowers to actually see what the flower will end up looking like, which is crazy. After it forms a bulb, it'll, send up a flower, send up leaves, and then often the bulb, after 1 or 2 years, it'll split in half and form daughter bulbs. And those bulbs will take several years, probably about 5 years, to become a full bulb themselves. So in the meantime, as those bulbs are branching off and breaking off, they're not forming nice big flowers, or they're not forming any flower at all. So a lot of the tulips that we get here, they're ready for that one really good showing, and they're going to do that one really good showing, but then the next year they might not have as big of a flower, or they might not have any flower at all. And that's really just not okay when we have, so many people coming in to visit all of these tulips. So usually for our main areas, like I said, like all of downtown and stuff, we will replace the bulbs every single year. If you were going to do this in your own landscape, you could keep the bulbs for multiple years. You probably will find that the bloom is a bit smaller the next year. And then maybe you'll have one year, people will often say, I planted tulips and they come up every year, but this year nothing came up. Like that's probably because they're going through a cycle where they're producing more bulbs. And so they're getting ready to make the new tulips in the future. So for most of our bulbs, yeah, we dig them up every single year or rototill all the beds to get all of the bulbs up, and then we'll replace them every single year. We do have Holland in Bloom hosts a community tulip dig day where people can come and they pay $10 for like a 5-gallon bucket that they can fill with tulip bulbs. That's awesome, and I'm happy people do that. Just people might not know that the tulip that they get might not have the same big giant bloom that you saw in the landscape. So yeah, I think, does that cover that pretty well?
I just wondered, so during the winter, the tulip kind of hibernates, or do they actually freeze since they're not that far down?
Yeah, so tulips need a cold period to set new glucose and like sugar molecules so that they can actually produce the flower. So if you were to get a bulb shipped in and grow it in Florida and you never had it go through a cold period, it wouldn't form a good flower. It wouldn't actually be a healthy bulb. So in Florida, places will actually, they'll order pre-chilled bulbs, which usually drop down to about 40 degrees, and they keep them there for about 15 weeks is usually about how long the bulb needs to go through a period of about 40 degrees or less. So we're really lucky in Holland that just kind of happens naturally out in the landscape. They shouldn't get through like a really, really deep frost. So usually the soil does do some insulating, protecting to keep them, the roots still alive and everything like that, because the tulips will start to send out roots already in the fall when we plant them. But they do need that cold period to go through to actually produce the flower. So cold is important. We all need seasons of winter and times to rest and relax, to be invigorated for the next year. And I think tulips really show that.
Thank you. Another question from the chat. What is going to happen to the old greenhouse?
Ooh. What a can of worms.
Emily might want to pass on that one.
Yeah, I'll just talk a little bit about it, but that's kind of a big issue that if you guys have an opinion, you should be writing your council member about it. So the old greenhouse, like I said, it's 100 years old and it is on the historic registry. So just dismantling it has some ramifications, especially because it could open the city up to some legal action because it is on the registry of historic places. So it can't just be dismantled without careful consideration. So there are proposals by some people to move it to Centennial Park, at least the main old historic glass frame, which is the main big building that people were taking wedding photos in front of. The big house is what we call it, is the most historic part of the structure. The other additions were added sometimes one was in the 80s. But the historic structure, I think there's proposals to move it to Centennial Park. There's proposals to move it to Window on the Waterfront. There's proposals just to dismantle it. So that's still kind of up in the air. Last year, or in 2020, they did a big study session and had people come in with ideas. And then COVID hit, and I think the ball kind of got dropped when everything shut down for COVID. Last year, they did a study for Centennial Park and had community input about a long-term plan for Centennial Park, and if moving the greenhouse there would be an option. So yeah, it's still kind of up in the air. Right now it's just sitting there, kind of looks a little bit sad, all empty. It's crazy because I used to work there every day and I was like, okay, this is fine and beautiful. And now I go in there, I'm like, this is terrifying. I don't want to be in this building right now. So hopefully something can be figured out soon. But yeah, if you have any vested interest or opinion, I think let city council know, and then we can get that ball rolling again. So yeah.
I love that.
I have one more question and 2 comments, and then I maybe I'm done. Looks like one person said 2 comments. Love to hear that about biological treatments.
Yeah.
And
Excited about
also
that.
congratulations on your new baby, which I'm sure everyone here
Yeah.
would agree.
Very excited.
And then the last question that I have in the chat right now are supply chain issues affecting shipments of plants and bulbs?
Definitely. So this year I was so excited. I'm like, I'm growing 40% of our annuals from seed. That's going to save us a lot of money. And then I put everything in the cart and it was the exact same total as last year. And I'm like,
Wow.
why? What did I just choose really expensive plants? No. I went through and I looked, and some of our plants that I have ordered all the way back in 2018, they used to come at $65 per thousand, are not $300 per thousand.
Oh my
That
God.
one's an outlier. That's begonia big, but a lot of them have doubled in price. So we are definitely experiencing supply chain issues. The whole greenhouse grower manufacturer is definitely experiencing supply chain issues. Expect that when you go to the garden centers this year, things are going to be a bit more expensive. Some of the soil amendments, like we use vermiculite, which is a kind of like a soil sandy substance that helps keep retention in the potting soil. That's just our suppliers that we get it from all said, we just don't have it this year. We can't get it at all. So there's a lot of supply chain issues. So really that shows the importance of my ability to grow stuff from seed in the greenhouse and having that resiliency to grow things in-house and make sure that, even we're going to probably be continuing to face some supply chain problems in the future, and make sure that I can do more of the stuff in-house so that we can kind of avoid some of that.
Anyone else in the classroom have a question? Susan, are we all taken care of over there?
I will do one more check and it looks like we are.
Good.
All right.
Answered a lot of
with,
Yeah.
with Emily's beautiful pictures and that little bit of sun you can see peeking in through the window there. I'm sure she's made us all feel better about this cold winter because
Yeah.
spring is going to come. So help me thank Emily for her presentation.
All right.
Thank you, everyone at home. I see some of you dropping off. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the sunshine.